High up in the branches of the old banyan tree, Mr. and Mrs. Sparrow had built their nest. It was a cozy little home made of twigs and leaves, lined with soft grass and feathers. Every morning the sun peeked through the leaves, painting the nest with warm light. Mr. and Mrs. Sparrow would sing happily, their little hearts full of joy. Soon there would be little sparrows to fill their nest with even more joy. Mrs. Sparrow had laid 4 tiny speckled eggs. She spent her days keeping them warm while Mr. Sparrow flew back and forth bringing her tasty caterpillars and juicy worms. Life was good. They were a happy family, eagerly awaiting the day their little ones would hatch. One afternoon, a strange quiet fell over the forest. The usual chatter of monkeys and chirping of crickets seemed to disappear. Even the leaves of the banyan tree stood still. Mr. Sparrow, returning with a plump caterpillar for Mrs. Sparrow, felt a tremor run through the branch he perched on. He cocked his head, a little uneasy. Down below, a giant was on the move. It was Raja, the elephant, his temper short from the scorching summer heat. He trumpeted angrily, a sound that shook the ground and sent shivers up the trees. Birds took flight in a flurry of feathers and small animals scurried for cover. Raja was not in a mood to be trifled with. He stomped through the forest, his massive feet crushing everything in his path. Bushes were uprooted, small trees snapped like twigs, and the once peaceful watering hole was now a muddy mess. The animals watched from a safe distance, their hearts pounding with fear. Mr. Sparrow, high up in the banyan tree, watched with growing alarm as Raja came closer. He chirped urgently to Mrs. Sparrow, telling her to stay hidden in the nest. Raja was getting dangerously close to their home. Suddenly, with a terrifying crack, the banyan tree shook violently. Raja, in his blind rage, had rammed his massive head against the trunk. Mr. and Mrs. Sparrow clung to the edge of their nest, their tiny bodies tossed about like leaves in a storm. Then, with a sickening crunch, their world fell apart. Raja, feeling the tremor of the falling branches, finally seemed to come out of his frenzy. He looked around at the destruction he had caused, his anger fading into a dull ache in his heart. He hadn't meant to hurt anyone, but the heat had made him forget his own strength. Mr. and Mrs. Sparrow slowly hopped down to the ground, their hearts breaking at the sight of their ruined home. The tiny speckled eggs were crushed beyond repair. Mrs. Sparrow let out a mournful cry, tears welling up in her eyes.
Such a tragedy. Those were going to be fine little sparrows.
The voice belonged to Woody, the old woodpecker who lived in the heart of the forest. He had seen what happened and had come to offer his condolences.
Don't lose hope, little friends. We will find a way to teach that bully a lesson.